Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Chloe Sparwath, a young Voices contributor who's currently in Atlanta, Georgia. She will be moving to Washington, D.C. very shortly. Today, we are going to talk about the narratives that are taking shape concerning the war in Gaza. Chloe, the fighting may have paused, but the narrative war has not. How would you describe the current media landscape surrounding the Israel-Hamas conflict?
Yeah, it is. The war is definitely still ongoing. They're fighting the eighth front, as a lot of people like to say, for the truth in the media. Media outlets, as I wrote in a town hall article that just recently came out, are twisting language to blur the moral line between Hamas terrorists and Israeli victims. We've seen it a lot after the release of the living hostages that just happened this past month in exchange for almost 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. The media used a lot of phrases like hostage swap and prisoner exchange. And we also saw a lot of Holocaust inversions and attempts to equate basically the hostages being released and prisoners who were in prison for committing acts of terror or weapons smuggling, stuff like that, trying to make them out to be the same type of thing. So that's a lot of what we're seeing, basically trying to make two things, make Israel and Hamas out to be kind of just two legitimate governments fighting each other over land when it's obviously very different than that.
Right, you actually written and said that it's the language is the new battlefield. Can you tell our global audience what does that mean in the context of Israel Hamas? I want to know what is the story that is being told globally.
Yeah, so media is definitely being used as a weapon by Iran, their proxies like Hamas, and their anti-Western allies like Russia and China. So it's kind of, you could say honestly, like the battlefield thing, it's a metaphor, it is, but it's also pretty tangible. Like with Hamas, the more civilians that die or get wounded in Gaza, Hamas gets pity and the money that they want to come in because of that. They have, it's a famous saying, I forget who said it, but it was someone in Hamas said, "We love death like our enemies love life." They will intentionally sacrifice their people as a necessary evil to get rid of Israel. Hamas doesn't shelter civilians in tunnels. They tell people not to evacuate. They tell civilians to stand on their roofs so that Israel won't bomb. And they store military materials and civilian infrastructure. And so then you see on the media, oh, Israel bombed a hospital. Israel bombed a school or a house. And so it makes it's intentional shaping by Hamas to make Israel look like intentionally going after civilians or intentionally going after civilian infrastructure when it's Hamas knows the way that the media will frame it, and they use it as kind of a war intentionally.
Right. Hamas has frequently been accused by Israel for basically using civilians as human shields. But I want to dig deeper into what you said earlier. Why do you have a problem with headlines that use the terms hostage swap or prisoner release or calling Hamas the resistance? Is it because these taglines are not just about informing, they're actually now about shaping opinions and shaping a larger narrative?
Yeah, they're definitely written to shape emotions instead of just telling people exactly what's going on. I mean, calling the mass murderers that were released in the prisoner swap from Israeli jails, the Palestinian prisoners that were released in exchange for the Israeli hostages, calling them, prisoners of wars or hostages the same way that we call the civilians released from Gaza hostages. It's not reporting, it's intentional propaganda. Men who were being released from the jails in Israel, the Palestinian prisoners being released from jail, were men who murdered civilians, and the hostages were either the vast majority of the Israeli hostages were civilians. The media owes audiences the truth, not trying to make moral equivalencies, which is a lot of what we see. the hostage situation and what happened on October 7th was a result of intentional evil and barbaric cruelty. It's hard to justify it or soften it, especially when you can see, videos of Hamas terrorists like filming themselves killing people or shooting dogs, which they did. So the attempt is made to make it seem like Israel is just as bad, or they did the bad stuff first. Like Israel had all these people, all these Palestinians in jail. So what Hamas did when they took prisoners on October 7th was basically the same thing. They just took people because Israel had people first. But the reality is that all of the people who were in the jails that were released during this hostage exchange, they were either in jail for the most extreme cases, planning suicide bombings, stabbing college students, like I mentioned, weapon smuggling, that type of thing. And then the attempt to make them seem like it was just the same thing. So you'll see reporting from different journalists talking to, like I mentioned in the article, talking to the relatives of the released prisoners, crying, saying they're so upset that their relative is being released, but maybe not being released into the West Bank or into Gaza. And that's the only thing the media focuses on, is like the emotional part that tugs on the heartstrings of the audience, that, this person's relative is not coming back to them even after being released from prison. But what they didn't tell you was that this girl's relative was one of the people who was released for carrying out an act of violent terror. And so, you don't balance journalism by equating hostages with terrorists. And it's not an accident. I think it's very intentional. We've seen it from a lot of different news outlets. We've seen it from influencers. And it's definitely a problem because it does to the audience. If you hear the phrase, a hostage exchange, you think, okay, Israel have also taken hostages from Palestine. So what they did to the hostages, what they did on October 7th, isn't actually that big of a deal in context, because Israel did it first. What Hamas did isn't that bad because Israel did it first. They were just doing it back to to Israel. But it's really not the same thing. And anybody who takes a closer look can realize that a man who blew up a bus with civilians on it is not the same as an elderly man who was, kidnapped from his farm. But it's right. Intentional, and it's not something that enough people are calling out.
Right. Chloe, I want to just give a little bit of overview. So October 7, 2023 happens. Hamas carries out arguably its largest terror attack on Israel. More than 1,200 civilians are killed. Around 250 to 300 people are taken hostages. I want you to give us an overview of how the media has played a role from October 7, 2023 to now. Because when the attack happened, Hamas was categorized as a clear-cut terror organization. But in these last 2 years, things have changed. The terminology has changed. And I want to know from you, how have word choices by, let's say, global outlets or certain media organizations in the West shaped public opinion about the conflict?
Yeah, it's very interesting. The narrative shaped very fast, at least the mainstream media, when it first happened. In the first few days, weeks after October 7th happened, and you did see, the circulation of the videos that Hamas filmed themselves and, posted themselves on, of them filming them kidnapping people on GoPro and, filming families crying after they murdered one of the daughters in front of the rest of the family in a household. I mentioned shooting a dog, like stuff like that. They posted that online and they weren't shying away from it. And the global media, largely picked up on that, rightly calling Hamas a terrorist organization. But I will say that it didn't last long. The world and the media being on the side of Israel, not that, medias are not supposed to take a side, but the media fairly covering Israel, I would say, did not necessarily last long, especially when Israel launched its, defensive counterattack back into Gaza to get rid of Hamas. So since then, the main thing, the main way that I can describe it is kind of this like false David and Goliath dichotomy, where the media frames this conflict as Israel is Goliath, this like giant bad guy who has all the money and power, and is just beating down on David. Biblical analogy here. And, David is Palestinian people, Hamas, not equating Palestinian people with Hamas. They are not the same thing. But you could, you could talk about the same things here.
Right.
And basically like this oppressor-oppressed narrative, this, framing Hamas as the resistance. And, going back to what I said, like, the framework of resistance, in that Israel has been doing all these bad things to Gaza for whatever, taking prisoners. So all little David Hamas is doing is just fighting back against Goliath. And so we've seen a lot of that, and a lot of just trying to downplay what Hamas did, what Hamas is, and the situation that's actually going on in Gaza.
I want to put forward a more counterpoint to what we've been speaking about. Sure, Hamas carried out a major terror attack on Israel, but then Israel's response has been exactly what you said. It's been like a David and Goliath kind of a situation. Israel is bigger. Israel has America's support. Israel's got the bigger weapons, the better weapons. And Israel's actions have led to the death of many innocent Palestinians. It's not the case that Palestinians were always being used as human shields. Israel has committed serious actions that have led to the death of children, the death of women, and innocent civilians as well. In fact, Israeli institutes are themselves accepting that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and Israel's military is to be blamed for that. So when the Western media frames Israel as the aggressor, as the oppressor, there may be some truth to it. I want to know your thoughts and opinions on that.
I absolutely, there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and it's terrible. It's very sad to watch, the videos and stories that are coming out about civilians, innocent people in Gaza who are suffering. But war is tragic on all sides. And like I said, it's awful. And again, like I wanted to say before, when I think I said that, like, not trying to equate Palestine or the Palestinians and Hamas. But I think the main thing that people aren't getting is who is the cause of a lot of the suffering. After Israel officially pulled out of Gaza about 15 years ago, they left greenhouses, they left infrastructure, they left all these types of things. And like Hamas either burned down the infrastructure, or they used the materials to build back up their military to fight Israel again. Just in the past 2 years, Gaza and, essentially the Hamas leaders, because, they're the government, so that's where the money goes to. They've gotten billions and billions of dollars in aid from around the world. And all it's doing is making the Hamas leaders who are sitting in Qatar more wealthy. The people of Gaza are, struggling to get by day, but Hamas is stealing the aid and selling it at a higher price, or they're taking the aid for themselves. You see videos of, the hostage Evyatar David, who was recently released. Hamas made him film a video, or they filmed a video of him digging his own grave. And around that same week, there was a video that came out showing different Hamas leaders safe underground in their tunnels, fat, very, they were overweight because they have been stealing all the aid that the people in Gaza are supposed to be getting. And before that, like Gaza, there were so many possibilities. They got so much money, so much aid and help and world support. But unfortunately, their government didn't use all of those resources to build schools, build hospitals like they had originally promised. They built a war machine building up to October 7th, and that was the result. So I don't doubt that, like every military in the world, like every country in the world, there are bad eggs in the Israeli military, or there are bad eggs in the Israeli government. There are bad people who do bad things everywhere. I'm not saying they're perfect, but side by side, if you look at the Hamas charter that literally has, part of their goals that they explicitly say is to kill the Jews, and then you look at I don't know if you'd call it the charter or the decree of the IDF that's all about, engaging with respect. I've been told by several people that I know who serve in the IDF after October 7th, when they were a traumatized country, lots of people knew people who had been, murdered by hand by Hamas members, and then they were going in to fight Hamas. Before they went in, their commanders told them, you remember who you are, you remember what you're fighting for, you are not fighting the Palestinian people, we're in here to get rid of Hamas and get back our hostages. And I think that, again, kind of says it right there. I'm not saying that what's happening in Gaza isn't horrendous to look at. Again, some of the images that are coming out, there's, large parts of Gaza are leveled as a result of the war. But I think it also goes back to intention as well. Israel's goal is to get rid of Hamas. They gave Gaza back to the people to the Palestinians, land for peace. And then this is what happened. So I think you can see, again, in the intentions and the results of some things, kind of shows.
Right. Chloe, I think you raise a valid and very pertinent point that the media often equates Hamas with Palestine. And that's really not the case, because as people may recall, the moment the ceasefire began, within a day or two, Hamas started lining up people that were opposing them and started killing them brutally in the streets, videotaping it, filming it, and then claiming that they are the real voice of Palestine, that they are the face of free Palestine. But then these were the actions that they committed the first when the ceasefire began. So I think you're raising a very valid point. And on that, I want to build and ask you, are we witnessing a new kind of war now where media and agency play an equally important role when it comes to fighting overall?
Absolutely. I mean, we now have access to all of the information. We feel, me saying we, like the general public, people who are on the internet, we think we have access to all the information we could ever need in a 45-second TikTok videos. But so much of it is fake or out of context. I also think there's definitely some historical illiteracy that's going on. People don't understand. They don't understand the context behind not only this conflict, but lots of different conflicts that are going on. And so we only see what's right in front of us on, our screens going on now, but we might not understand like what happened to get us to this place. And I think that there was a congressman who said, the best thing about living in America is that we don't understand the evil of groups of Hamas, but also the worst thing about living in America is that we don't understand the evils of groups like Hamas. So I also think, that meaning that like, at least, people in my generation in the United States and, in Europe and whatnot, like we are not really old enough to have remembered a war going on where we actually thought we might not survive it. So the historical literacy and illiteracy and talking about like we actually don't understand, I think, what things are like in other areas of the world where people are genuinely like not sure if they're gonna make it to the next day. And so then you have influencers and people on the news and whatnot, crafting these narratives about people who who they don't necessarily understand their history or their countries. But yeah, it definitely is. It's a very interesting thing. I think people are putting a lot of different narratives out there. We have, this is a whole other can of worms, but like the China, Russia, Iran, Qatar, especially, like media giant is definitely investing a lot of money into media, into American influencers. And it's kind of scary. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a TikTok trend about a year or two ago where Osama bin Laden was trending, and there were literally like American kids on TikTok reading Osama bin Laden's, the letter, whatever he wrote before 9/11, and talking about saying, well, he had some points, he had some good points, that type of thing. So at least the narrative that I'm seeing, and I know a lot of my friends are seeing, on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, is this, underlying like anti-Western, narrative just in general. It's very weird and scary, but I think anybody can put anything out there. And then, Twitter, TikTok, it all seems larger than life. And I think sometimes the people who are in power, in Congress, in other positions of power, think the voices of Twitter perhaps are have more voting power than they really do. But the public discourse is influenced by social media, by the media, and then that in turn determines how people vote. And people in office want to stay in office. So if it seems like a lot of people on Twitter are upset about one certain thing, or the media is covering, one certain thing in a certain light, then that's also how they're going to shift their legislative agenda because, they want to stay in office. So it's kind of just like stacked dominoes that are really affecting the way people see a lot of things. And it's, like you said, it's all this new wave of media that's going on. But I think it's really important, just going back to the beginning of all this, like we need journalists and influencers who cover not only the Gaza-Israel conflict honestly, but who cover all conflicts honestly, without euphemisms, inversions, false moral equivalencies, all of that stuff. We need people who journalists who are just going to act with honesty, and influencers especially, who are going to be educated and produce content in good faith.
Yeah. So where we're at a stage right now where you've got two groups on the internet. You're either pro-Israel or you're pro-Palestine, and there's nothing in between. Because if you have a balanced view, both of the sides are very quick to jump on you and give you a label. So my fear is that if this continues, there's going to be a greater divide politically and ideologically on the internet, but also in real life. And I want to end with that because I want to ask you, if this narrative war carries on the way it's going on, what long-term damage do you see happening when it comes to the internet and social media?
Yeah, first of all, I think you made a really good point, like that you either have to be pro-Israel or you have to be pro-Palestine, and I think that is the most sad thing in the world. I want to say, I'm pro-human, but that sounds really cheesy. But truly, there are, especially in Israel and Palestine, at least in my experience, there are so many more people who just want to live, and the pro-Palestine, pro-Israel narrative, I think, really is a narrative that doesn't come from Israel or Palestine. And I think it's very important that we remind ourselves that we can want good lives in safety and peace for everybody. We might perhaps disagree with how we're going to get there, but just because you support the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state doesn't mean that you want bad things to happen to people in Gaza or you want bad things to happen to people in the West Bank. I don't think pro-Israel or pro-Palestine has to mean anti-anybody. But anyway, so that's my first thought. But your question, more about the media, I think, yeah, we're seeing a huge just like shift on the world stage with media. I know, I mean, most of my news comes from, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I do get up and I read, different news sources every day to try to get, see what CNN is saying, see what Fox is saying, even see what Al Jazeera is saying, that type of thing. But I think a lot of people now truly they get their news from TikTok. And then not only do they get their news from TikTok, or they get their news from Instagram, or even Snapchat has news stations that play little clips. Once your phone or, the media source realizes what type of things you're interested in and what your opinion is, then all it does is play, videos and influencers that agree with you. So, right now, like anybody can see it, but like my Instagram is all stuff to do with Israel and Taylor Swift, because I'm a big Taylor Swift fan. But, but other people, like all they would see is, Russia, Ukraine, whatever your phone, however the algorithm works, however your phone, whatever it thinks you want to see, it's going to give to you. So everybody, I think, is just kind of living in their own little bubbles where all they see is the influencers that they follow, and the kind of stories that they want to see. Because I mean, TikTok, I know they have an algorithm. Again, I am not a technology person, so I don't know exactly how it works, but like, where they can see how long you view a video, and videos that have people watching them the longest get bumped or something like that. So, right. It really is. It's just all feeding into each other. Everybody's pushing a different narrative. But then once someone kind of finds a narrative that resonates with them, then it's all they see. And it is really dangerous. And I can admit that I'm seeing a lot of influencers who agree with me, and I know, friends who have different opinions from me on some of the issues that we've been talking about. When we'll get together and talk about it, they'll be like, "Oh, I didn't see that, but I did see this and this and this." So a lot of times, also with the media, I think it's not necessarily even that it's lying or making statements that are blatantly false. I think the most dangerous thing is just intentional not reporting or intentional over reporting. Like, this bad thing happened and we're just not going to talk about it because it doesn't go with our narrative, or this good thing did happen and we agree with it, and so we're going to talk a ton about that. But it's almost like people are living in two different universes, right, where they don't even know what the other side is hearing about. So
well, media has become like that. It's become a game of clickbait. It's become a game of numbers. And often, I worked in major media houses, and I saw it happening firsthand, that often context would be left out because it would either dull the story, or it would be too complicated. So we would just go with whatever would get us the most views, the most clicks, and the most money. And that's what it's become about these days. And I think sometimes what people really need to do is when you're stuck in your algorithm, when you're stuck in your bubble, as you said, it's better to just put the phones down, get on a conversation like this, talk to people, air out ideas, get multiple perspectives, and then maybe look into social media, look into digital media, because it gives you different opinions, it gives you different ideas, and that should be the way to go forward.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly.
Well, on that good note, thank you, Chloe, for speaking with us and for sharing your views. And this was a very insightful conversation, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.